Madison Clark was a respected correctional officer at Black Ridge State Penitentiary until a secret affair with inmate Tyrone Massey turned deadly. When their hidden relationship was on the brink of exposure, Madison made a choice that would change everything. She killed Tyrone to protect herself. But in trying to cover up the truth, she ignited a chain of events that spiraled out of control, revealing corruption, betrayal, and a shocking prison scandal no one saw coming. Madison Clark had always been the kind of person who blended seamlessly into her environment. She was neither flashy nor loud, but her presence was felt strongly by those around her. At Black Ridge State Penitentiary, a high-security prison located on the outskirts of a small rural town, Madison was well known among staff and inmates alike. She was the type of correctional officer who seemed unshakable, steady, reliable, and completely dedicated to her work. For 8 years she had worked there, rising steadily through the ranks, never missing a day, never drawing unnecessary attention to herself. Her record was impeccable, her reputation solid. To the outside world, she was simply the model employee. Her daily routine was a testament to discipline. Madison arrived early every morning, always in a perfectly pressed uniform, ready to face the challenges the day would bring. Prison life was never easy, and she understood that well. The environment was tense, full of raw emotions and hidden dangers. But Madison had developed a keen sense of control. She knew how to read people, both guards and inmates. Her calm demeanor often diffused situations before they escalated. She had earned the grudging respect of the toughest inmates and the admiration of her supervisors. No one questioned her loyalty or professionalism. Black Ridge was known for housing some of the state's most violent offenders. Every day, Madison walked the line between order and chaos, ensuring that rules were followed and that the fragile peace was maintained. Unlike some officers who used fear or aggression to command authority, Madison preferred to rely on quiet strength and an unyielding gaze. She understood the power of presence and silence, and she used both skillfully. Her colleagues often described her as someone who seemed to understand the prison's pulse better than anyone else. She was a figure of control in a place where control was always at risk. Despite this outward strength, Madison's life was far from perfect. Behind her professional facade lay a woman struggling with loneliness and dissatisfaction. She lived alone in a modest apartment not far from the prison, a place that felt more like a temporary shelter than a home. Her social circle was small, mostly co-workers and a few acquaintances from her past. Relationships were difficult to maintain with her unpredictable schedule and the emotional toll of her job. She rarely talked about her personal life, and no one really knew what she thought when she wasn't wearing her uniform. The job demanded much more than physical presence. It required emotional resilience. Madison often found herself haunted by the stories she heard inside those walls. The regrets, the broken lives, the moments of desperation. She kept those stories locked away, never allowing them to affect her judgment or her commitment. But the weight of those experiences was heavy. After long shifts, she would sometimes sit alone in her apartment, feeling the silence press in around her like a physical force. The loneliness was a constant companion. Yet Madison had a way of convincing herself that she was in control of her life. She had plans, quiet ambitions. She wanted to move up, to perhaps one day become a supervisor, or take on a role where she could influence changes in the system. For now, though, she stayed grounded in her current position, performing her duties with precision. She was respected, even admired by some, and that meant something in a place where trust was scarce. Her life at the prison followed a strict rhythm. She was assigned to various units but had recently been placed in charge of one of the more volatile sections. The prisoners in her unit were known for their unpredictability and history of violence. But Madison handled them with a calm confidence that seemed almost unnatural. There was something about the way she moved through the corridors, careful, measured, yet watchful, that made even the most dangerous inmates hesitate before crossing her. Madison had developed routines that gave her a sense of security. She memorized the shifts, the personalities, the subtle power dynamics among the inmates. She knew who to watch closely and who to give some space. She understood the importance of small acts of kindness as well as firm boundaries. Sometimes, she would bring extra food to an inmate recovering from illness, or discreetly pass along a book to one who loved to read. These gestures were small but significant in the harsh environment of Blackridge. They earned her a kind of cautious loyalty. What truly set Madison apart, however, was her ability to remain calm under pressure. The prison was a pressure cooker, and she had learned how to diffuse tensions before they exploded. There were moments of chaos, fights breaking out, threats whispered in dark corners, contraband being smuggled. Yet Madison's presence seemed to bring a strange kind of order. She never lost her temper, never raised her voice unnecessarily. It was this unshakable calm that made her so effective and so trusted. Despite all this, there were hints that Madison's perfect life was fragile. The weight she carried inside was invisible to most but ever present. Sometimes, when no one was watching, her eyes would betray a flicker of something darker, a flicker of doubt, fear, or sadness. It was a secret she kept well hidden, buried, beneath layers of discipline and control. This hidden side of Madison was a puzzle. To her colleagues, she was a fortress of professionalism. To the inmates, a steady and sometimes unexpectedly kind figure. Yet beneath it all, there was a yearning for connection, for something more than the cold routines of prison life. She longed for companionship, for someone to understand the complexities behind her stoic exterior. Madison's world was about to change, though she didn't realize it yet. One assignment would shift the delicate balance she had maintained for so long. It was a new inmate, someone who would challenge everything she believed about control, loyalty, and survival. A man whose presence would awaken secrets Madison had fought hard to keep buried. The prison never truly sleeps, and the walls hold many stories. Madison Clark's story was about to become one of the darkest chapters in Blackridge's history. The perfect employee, the steadfast officer, was about to make a choice that would alter the course of her life forever. And no one would see it. Coming Tyrone Massey arrived at Blackridge State Penitentiary with a reputation that preceded him. Convicted of armed robbery and assault, he was a man who had seen the darker sides of life and survived. At 32 years old, Tyrone carried himself with a quiet confidence, one that immediately set him apart from many other inmates. There was something magnetic about him, an easy charm wrapped around a dangerous edge. Staff and prisoners alike were wary of him, sensing that beneath his calm exterior lurked a sharp mind and a willingness to do whatever it took to stay in control. When Madison Clark was assigned to his unit, she approached him with the same professionalism she showed all inmates. She treated Tyrone like any other prisoner, strict but fair, firm but respectful. Yet, there was an unspoken tension whenever their paths crossed. Tyrone noticed her calm authority, and Madison saw in him a subtle intelligence that few others recognized. Over time, their interactions moved beyond simple exchanges of orders and compliance. It started with small gestures. Tyrone requested extra food during mealtimes, something that was against prison rules, but not unheard of for officers to occasionally grant. Madison found herself slipping him extra portions here and there, not out of kindness, but out of curiosity, and a growing sense of connection she didn't fully understand. Tyrone was different from the other inmates she dealt with. He was articulate, thoughtful, and possessed a depth that intrigued her. Soon, what began as minor favors turned into secret meetings. Madison found excuses to be near his cell during rounds, lingering just long enough to exchange a few quiet words or pass small items. The risks were high. Surveillance cameras covered most areas, and any breach of protocol could mean serious consequences. But Madison had become skilled at navigating the system, knowing which cameras were monitored closely and which were not. She used this knowledge to create opportunities for private encounters. Behind the walls of Black Ridge, a forbidden affair slowly took shape. Neither Madison nor Tyrone admitted to it openly. There was no overt acknowledgement, no declarations of love. It was a dangerous dance played out in shadows and whispered exchanges. They shared stolen moments in the infirmary, where Madison would claim a need to check on inmates' health. The infirmary was one of the few places where staff could be somewhat isolated from the constant watch of the guards and cameras. There, Tyrone had access to a burner phone Madison had managed to smuggle in, allowing them to communicate freely without fear of immediate detection. Their secret was like a fragile thread stretched tight between them. Madison was acutely aware of the risks. If anyone discovered their relationship, the consequences would be devastating. She could lose her job, face criminal charges, and be publicly disgraced. Tyrone risked further punishment and possibly being transferred to a more restrictive facility. Yet, neither could seem to pull away. For Madison, the affair was a form of escape from her isolation. Tyrone offered a sense of companionship and understanding that she had never experienced. He listened when she spoke, showed interest in her thoughts, and made her feel seen in a way the harsh world of Black Ridge never had. It was intoxicating and dangerous in equal measure. Tyrone, however, played a different game. While he appeared invested, he was always calculating. He knew the power this secret gave him and was not above using it to his advantage. As their contact grew more frequent, he began to push boundaries. Requests for special favors turned into demands. The burner phone became a tool for blackmail rather than just communication. He recorded some of their conversations and kept copies of text messages, knowing that if Madison ever refused him, he could expose her. His demands escalated, from extra privileges and contraband to threats of violence if she didn't comply. Tyrone saw Madison's vulnerability and was determined to exploit it fully. Madison's initial feelings of connection gave way to fear and desperation. She was trapped in a web of her own making. The man she had once trusted now held her future in his hands. Every day became a balancing act, trying to meet Tyrone's demands without raising suspicion. She grew anxious during her shifts, constantly, watching for signs that anyone else was onto her. The prison environment grew even more hostile for Madison as she struggled to maintain her composure. She knew the slightest mistake could unravel everything. Tyrone's influence over her was growing stronger, yet she couldn't bring herself to cut ties. The affair had become a secret addiction, something she couldn't let go of, even as it threatened to destroy her. Meanwhile, Tyrone's status among the inmates shifted. His ability to manipulate a correctional officer added to his reputation. Others whispered about his connections and his apparent immunity to the usual rules. This emboldened him, making him more reckless in his demands and behavior. He grew increasingly brazen, believing he was untouchable. Madison's attempts to maintain control faltered. She was no longer the steady, unshakable officer everyone admired. The weight of the secret affair pressed on her mind, clouding her judgment. Her work began to suffer. Small errors crept into her reports, and she started avoiding supervisors who might question her. She isolated herself even more, afraid that any slip would lead to exposure. In the background, the prison's surveillance system and security protocols remained as stringent as ever. Cameras covered hallways, common areas, and even the infirmary. Staff were trained to notice unusual behavior, and internal investigations were not uncommon. Yet, Madison had become adept at masking her activities, using her knowledge of blind spots and staff routines to her advantage. But the cracks were beginning to show. Whispers among other officers hinted at suspicion. Some noticed Madison spending unusual amounts of time near Tyrone's cell. Others caught glimpses of her accessing areas without clear reason. Though no one had concrete proof, a sense of unease spread through the ranks. As the weeks passed, Madison's life became a precarious balancing act. She was caught between her duty as a correctional officer and the dangerous ties she had formed. Tyrone's demands grew more insistent, and her options dwindled. The secret affair was no longer just a risky liaison. It had become a ticking time bomb, threatening to explode at any moment. Madison's mind raced with possibilities. She wondered how far Tyrone would go to leverage their relationship. She feared the consequences if anyone found out. Yet the most terrifying thought was that she might have already lost control, that the secret she had tried to keep hidden was slipping through her fingers. The prison walls held many secrets, but some are more dangerous than others. Madison's secret affair with Tyrone Massey was about to cross a line from which there was no return. What started as a dangerous game of trust and control was turning into a nightmare, one that neither of them could predict. And as the days moved forward, the tension in Blackridge grew thicker, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shock everyone involved. Madison's world had shrunk to a suffocating sphere of fear and desperation. Every day at Blackridge State Penitentiary, she walked a tightrope, balancing her public face as a reliable correctional officer against the secret that threatened to unravel her life completely. Tyrone Massey's demands had become increasingly urgent and more dangerous. His threats to expose their affair if she didn't cooperate were no longer whispered warnings, but overt ultimatums that shook the foundation of her carefully controlled existence. She knew the consequences if anyone found out. Her career would be over, her reputation destroyed, and she might face criminal charges. But worse than that was the shame, the public humiliation, and the crushing loss of everything she had worked for. Madison had dedicated her life to the prison, believing in discipline and order. Now, the order was collapsing around her. Tyrone held the key to her fate, and she was running out of time. The idea of escape, helping Tyrone break free, was whispered between them in coded messages and secret meetings. Tyrone made it clear he wanted out of Blackridge, and he wanted Madison's help. At first she had refused, terrified of the consequences and of becoming an accomplice to a dangerous criminal's escape plan. But Tyrone's threats escalated, and the noose tightened. His control over her mind and actions grew stronger, fueled by her fear and the intense pressure she felt every time their eyes met. Madison began to see no way out. The prison's walls were closing in, and Tyrone's demands became more than just favors. They were instructions, orders she felt compelled to obey. The line between right and wrong blurred until it vanished completely. What had started as a secret, illicit connection turned into a deadly game where the stakes were life and death. Then came the night that changed everything. During a routine head count, a carefully planned emergency call lured Tyrone to an isolated maintenance corridor within the prison, an area rarely used and poorly monitored by cameras. Madison had studied the schedules of guards, the timing of rounds, and the blind spots in surveillance. She knew this corridor was perfect. It was away from prying eyes and offered the seclusion she needed to act without interference. She called the control room with a fabricated emergency. An inmate had collapsed in the maintenance area. This triggered protocol, and guards were dispatched. Tyrone, following instructions from Madison's whispered messages, moved toward the corridor, expecting an opportunity to escape or at least meet with Madison secretly. But the plan was never for Tyrone to escape. Madison's desperation had reached a breaking point. She believed that eliminating Tyrone was the only way to stop the blackmail, to protect her career and salvage what remained of her life. She told herself it was a necessary evil, a momentary lapse in judgment forced by impossible circumstances. When Tyrone arrived, Madison was waiting. The corridor was dark and silent except for the faint hum of the prison's ventilation system. Without warning, she struck him from behind with a heavy metal tool, a wrench she had managed to conceal earlier that day. The blow was hard and sudden. Tyrone crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Panic surged through Madison's veins. She knew the risk of being caught was immense, but she moved quickly, covering the scene to look like something else entirely. She dragged Tyrone's body to a corner and staged the area to resemble an attack by another inmate. Blood spattered, signs of a struggle. She then alerted the guards to the emergency, feigning shock and distress as she reported what she claimed was an inmate-on-inmate assault. The prison's usual chaos quickly took over. Officers rushed to the scene, finding Tyrone lifeless and bleeding. The medical team arrived but could do nothing to save him. Tyrone Massey was dead. In the immediate aftermath, Madison maintained her calm. She answered questions with carefully rehearsed responses and stuck to the story she had prepared. Her fabricated report was detailed, blaming a rival gang member for the attack. Surveillance footage confirmed the timing of the incident, but did not capture the actual attack in the maintenance corridor. Madison's alibi and flawless service record worked in her favor. At first, the prison officials and investigators accepted the story. The brutal realities of prison life meant inmate violence was sadly common. Tyrone's death was written off as another tragic event in Blackridge's dangerous environment. Madison exhaled, feeling a brief, bitter relief. She believed she had escaped the worst of it, but the truth was far from settled. What Madison didn't realize was that her plan, executed in haste and panic, had left critical errors behind. Small details overlooked in the chaos. The angle of Tyrone's wounds, the position of his body, inconsistencies in her timeline, would soon begin to unravel her carefully constructed deception. For now, though, Madison kept her head down. She continued her duties, more cautious than ever. Yet beneath the surface, guilt gnawed at her. The weight of what she had done pressed heavily on her conscience. She was haunted by Tyrone's lifeless eyes and the silence of that maintenance corridor. The secret she had tried so hard to bury now burned inside her like a constant fire. Unknown to Madison, investigators were already starting to probe deeper. The initial acceptance of her story was just the beginning. Forensics experts began analyzing the crime scene and evidence, looking for anything that didn't fit the official narrative. The prison's internal affairs unit quietly reopened files and reviewed surveillance logs with fresh eyes. Madison's relief was short-lived. What she thought was a clean break from her secret past was about to become the spark that ignited a larger investigation, one that would threaten to expose not only her crime, but the dangerous web of lies and betrayal that led to it. The line between survival and destruction had been crossed. Madison's desperate act had set in motion a chain of events that would consume her life and unravel the carefully maintained order at Black Ridge. The murder was supposed to cover up a secret affair, but something had gone terribly wrong, and there was no turning back. The days following Tyrone Massey's death felt like living inside a nightmare for Madison Clark. At first, everything seemed to be going according to her desperate plan. The prison's leadership accepted the official story of an inmate attack, and the internal investigation appeared routine. Yet beneath the surface, the prison's atmosphere had shifted. Whispered conversations among the officers grew more frequent, and eyes that once trusted her now lingered longer, suspiciously. Madison's sense of security was slipping away. She moved through the prison corridors with forced calm, each step weighed down by anxiety. The secret she carried was no longer just hers. It had begun to infect every corner of her world. Her colleagues noticed the subtle changes, the tightness in her jaw, the restless glances, the way she flinched at unexpected noises. Some whispered that something was wrong with Madison, but no one dared confront her directly. Meanwhile, the prison's internal affairs division intensified their review. The forensic team had uncovered inconsistencies in the crime scene that didn't match Madison's report. The position of Tyrone's body and the angle of the fatal blow suggested a struggle far different from what Madison had claimed. The blood spatter pattern was inconsistent with the supposed assailant's actions. These findings raised questions that demanded answers. Investigators began looking deeper into the relationships Tyrone had within the prison. His sudden death raised suspicions about possible motives, and they started pulling at threads in his recent interactions, his connections to other inmates, guards, and particularly Madison Clark. Rumors circulated quietly but persistently that Madison had been unusually involved with Tyrone, but these whispers remained unconfirmed. Madison felt the pressure tightening like a vice. Every routine procedure at work became a trial of nerve and control. She knew it was only a matter of time before the investigation focused squarely on her. In private moments, she wrestled with the enormity of what she had done. The weight of guilt was relentless, and the fear of discovery gnawed at her sanity. To complicate matters further, a new staff member was assigned to the internal affairs team, Detective Marcus Reed. He was known for his sharp instincts and unrelenting pursuit of the truth. Reed had a reputation for uncovering hidden details that others missed. From the moment he arrived at Black Ridge, Madison sensed that he would be the one to unravel her story. Detective Reed's methodical approach unsettled Madison. He asked questions that seemed harmless but had a way of digging beneath surface answers. He scrutinized her routine, her reports, and her behavior with an intensity that left no room for error. Madison found herself avoiding contact with him, hoping to stay under the radar, but it only increased his interest. Reed wasn't alone in his suspicions. Some of Madison's colleagues began to distance themselves, quietly withdrawing trust. Those who once admired her now watched warily. Even inmates noticed the change. Rumors spread among them, and Tyrone's death became a subject of hushed speculation. The prison, a place already rife with tension, grew colder, more dangerous. Into the weeks that followed, Madison's personal life deteriorated. The loneliness she had once endured became a crushing isolation. The burden of her secret made it impossible to confide in anyone, and she found herself slipping into bouts of despair. She stopped answering calls from friends and avoided social contact. Her apartment, once a refuge, felt like a prison of its own. One night, unable to bear the silence, Madison began writing in a small notebook she kept hidden. She poured out her fears, regrets, and confusion onto the pages. The act of writing was both cathartic and terrifying, a silent admission of the turmoil within her. But even as she tried to confront her demons, the walls of secrecy closed in tighter. Then came the turning point. A fellow correctional officer, a young woman named Rachel Davis, who had been quietly observing Madison's unusual behavior, decided to come forward. Rachel had noticed inconsistencies in Madison's timeline on the night of Tyrone's death and had heard rumors about the secret meetings between Madison and Tyrone. Torn between loyalty and her sense of justice, Rachel contacted Detective Reed, anonymously providing information that would become critical. This revelation sparked a fresh wave of investigation. Internal affairs officers began reviewing security footage more thoroughly, re-interviewing staff, and scrutinizing Madison's movements with renewed focus. The once dismissed whispers about Madison's involvement grew louder and more substantiated. Madison's carefully crafted story began to unravel under the weight of mounting evidence. The inconsistencies in her accounts and the testimony from Rachel painted a troubling picture. The secret affair that Madison had fought so hard to conceal was now exposed to scrutiny. Detective Reed approached Madison with a quiet determination. He didn't confront her aggressively, but made it clear that the truth would come out. His presence was a constant reminder that Madison's fate was slipping away. She felt cornered, vulnerable, and desperate. Under mounting pressure, Madison's mental state deteriorated rapidly. She began making mistakes at work, missing important details, showing signs of distraction, and once nearly causing a dangerous incident during a prisoner transport. Supervisors questioned her fitness for duty, but Madison refused to admit the full extent of her turmoil. Despite everything, Madison still clung to hope. She believed that if she could control the narrative, if she could somehow keep the worst secrets buried, she might survive the storm. But with each passing day, that hope diminished. As the investigation deepened, another shocking discovery surfaced. Tyrone Massey had been involved in an elaborate smuggling ring within Blackridge, moving contraband through trusted inmates and even some corrupt staff. Evidence suggested that Madison, knowingly or not, had been caught up in this network. The implication was clear. Her involvement with Tyrone was not just personal, but also connected to a broader criminal enterprise within the prison. This revelation rocked the prison community. Corruption and betrayal at such a level threatened to destabilize the institution. The leadership launched an emergency review, and media interest began to grow, threatening to turn Blackridge's internal crisis into a public scandal. Madison found herself isolated completely. The secret affair, the murder, the smuggling, each layer added to the avalanche, crushing her. She was no longer the respected officer, but a figure of suspicion, fear, and contempt. In the final days before charges were brought against her, Madison faced the harsh reality that she was alone. The man she had tried to silence was gone, but his shadow remained, stretching over every part of her life. The prison walls that once gave her purpose now felt like a cage from which there was no escape. Her story, once one of quiet strength and control, was unraveling in a tragic spiral. The very secret meant to protect her had become the instrument of her downfall, and as Blackridge prepared to confront the truth, Madison Clark stood at the edge of a precipice, her future uncertain, her past exposed, and her fate sealed by the choices she had made in the darkness. Madison Clark's world crumbled with relentless speed. The investigation that had started quietly within Blackridge State Penitentiary now exploded into a full-scale scandal, engulfing the prison and its staff. News outlets caught wind of the story, and soon, headlines splashed across local papers and social media. Correctional officer killed inmate to cover up secret affair, and Blackridge scandal, sex, lies, and murder behind bars. Madison's name was on everyone's lips, her face a symbol of betrayal and downfall. The prison administration faced intense scrutiny. How could such a dangerous affair happen between an officer and an inmate? How did the smuggling ring operate? Under their watch, the public demanded answers, and officials promised swift justice. The pressure inside Blackridge intensified, as officers and inmates alike braced for the fallout. Madison, meanwhile, was in custody, awaiting formal charges. The murder of Tyrone Massey was now officially under criminal investigation, with Madison accused of homicide, abuse of power, and conspiracy. Her legal team struggled to piece together a defense, but the mounting evidence against her was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, forensic reports, witness testimonies, and her own inconsistent statements created a damning picture. As the trial approached, the atmosphere around Madison shifted from fear to resignation. She spent long hours in a holding cell, haunted by memories of Tyrone, the illicit affair, and the terrible night in the maintenance corridor. The weight of guilt was suffocating, yet a part of her clung to a desperate hope that somehow the truth could be softened. The courtroom became a battleground. Prosecutors painted Madison as a corrupt officer who abused her authority for personal gain and, when threatened, resorted to murder to protect herself. They presented evidence of the affair, the smuggling ring, and Madison's role in orchestrating Tyrone's death. The narrative was clear, a betrayal of trust that ended in tragedy. Madison's defense tried to humanize her, portraying a woman trapped in a dangerous situation, manipulated by a cunning inmate. They argued that Madison acted out of fear, desperation, and confusion, claiming the killing was not premeditated but a panic-driven act of self-preservation. They sought to highlight her years of service and the pressure cooker environment of the prison. Despite their efforts, the jury found it difficult to separate the facts from the emotional weight of the case. The media coverage had already shaped public opinion. The secret affair and the murder became intertwined in the narrative of a fall from grace. The verdict was almost inevitable. When the guilty verdict was announced, Madison's world finally shattered. The judge's sentencing was harsh, but in line with the charges, a lengthy prison term and a permanent stain on her record. She was stripped of her badge, her career ended, and her future uncertain. But the story did not end with Madison's conviction. In the months that followed, the investigation into Blackridge's smuggling ring and corruption expanded. Other officers were implicated, and the prison underwent sweeping reforms. The scandal exposed systemic failures, leading to policy changes and increased oversight. Tyrone Massey's death became a catalyst for a broader reckoning within the prison system. Yet, in the quiet moments behind bars, Madison's mind remained trapped in the past. She replayed the choices she made, the moments of weakness, the big dangerous attraction, the desperate strike that ended a life. The secret affair that had promised escape had instead delivered destruction. Her fellow inmates treated her with a mix of curiosity and caution. Some sympathized, others resented her, and many viewed her as a cautionary tale. The woman who had once walked the halls as an officer was now just another prisoner, living with the consequences of her actions. Through it all, Madison never stopped, questioning how things had spiraled so far. Could she have walked away? Was there a way to fix what was broken before it became fatal? The answers eluded her, locked away behind prison walls and the unforgiving passage of time. Her story became a stark reminder of the dangerous intersections of power, secrecy, and vulnerability. A cautionary tale about what happens when boundaries blur and trust is betrayed. For those who watched from the outside, the Black Ridge scandal was a gripping true crime saga filled with shocking twists, a tale of forbidden love, betrayal, and murder inside a prison's cold walls. For Madison Clark, it was a personal tragedy written in blood and shadow, a life forever altered by a secret that should have stayed buried. And as the prison continued its slow march toward reform, the echoes of that secret affair and its deadly consequences lingered, a haunting reminder that some mistakes come with a price too high to pay, and sometimes the darkness within cannot be undone.